Back, everyone. So I kind of will use this time to allow for our panelists to talk about, well, to give advice and tips on their like writing style, editing style. So like, what kind of things do you guys pay attention to when you're writing before you kind of send those revisions to your editors, or what kind of things do you guys use to make sure you don't have to go back and make too many edits? So we can start with Ruth.
Yeah. Well, hey y'all. I think I was explaining this to my group, especially as like a new professional. Like I literally just started this job September 27th. Something that I think about is like house style. Like every publication has a different set of rules, a different way that they refer to things. And so I'm always very cognizant of that. And I think for me, I'm especially conscious of quotes because I don't want to misquote anyone or get anything wrong or take anything out of context. What I like to do is kind of try and sort of provide an imagery. The excerpt that they read was about like my interview with Kendrick Sampson from Insecure, who plays Nathan the barber. But talking about how he kind of frequents spots in Ladera Heights, the same way that Issa Rae did long before they met, right? And so I love to give sort of this kind of narrative like origin story for all the stories that I write. And make sure it has flow. I really enjoy that as well. I want it to feel like you're having a conversation with someone, but also making sure it's not too long and lengthy. That's something that I've been talking to my editor about, is just like shifting up the organization and structure of sentences, giving some variety. It doesn't always have to start with a dependent clause or end in that. It can be short. It can be whatever. It can add suspense. So yeah.
Okay. Sydney, would you like to touch base on what you and your group talked about?
Yeah, I mean, similar to what Ruth was saying, just like going over basic grammar mistakes and becoming familiar with what sort of style that your publication, whatever you're writing for, like the type of voice they have, the tone. I know at Billboard, they kind of like stress like this Billboard voice that we have. And so just like familiarizing yourself with other like stories that have been written at that publication. We didn't talk about this, but I'm just like thinking about it as we're talking. But yeah, just reading other articles to kind of get familiar with that. And then just like looking out for basic grammar mistakes and making sure that like if you're quoting someone like Ruth said, or like inserting facts or stats, like you're including the most up-to-date information once you like right before you send that final draft in. And also this is something that I'm still learning to do, but like writing in active voice and not passive voice is a big one too. And just being very concise with what you're saying and not making things overly flowery. Like sometimes you don't, like in news posts, they're just facts. You don't have to put too much of your opinion in it. But if it's like a cover story, then yeah, you're going to make it more like a creative writing type of thing. So it's just about like learning and recognizing what sort of piece you're doing and knowing how to scale it back when you need to, or like beef it up when you need to, I guess.
Okay. Deshonda?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, I need to say that Sydney and Ruth, for two young women who have just gotten out of college not too long ago, like y'all are doing amazing things. Like I've only been doing this for like 5 years, but y'all are doing things that most people who have been in the game for like 5, 10 years haven't even done. So congratulations to everything that y'all are doing. Y'all are doing amazing, sweetie. Same things that y'all touched on in your groups, we did as well. Just basic rules like how certain publications will have certain rules, like Essence will write differently than Blavity. Blavity will write different than Hypebae. Hype Bay will write different from Revolt. So it really depends on the publication that you write for. That's why it's always imperative when you do start contributing somewhere or freelance somewhere that you get familiarized with the style guide. But once you do get familiarized with the style guide, right, it is really important to know your voice. So my voice is very personalized. My voice is very homegirl next door. That will never change where I write, right? So if I have a certain style that I write for essence.com, what does it mean for Deshonda to write at essence.com? If I'm going to write at Forbes, what does it mean for Deshonda to write at Forbes? Mind you, I'm following all the rules, but as a writer, it's very imperative that you have your own voice and you have your own sauce and you have your own swag. That way you stand out from the rest of the contributors that you're part of. I didn't get a chance to say that when I was in my group because we were focusing on the exercise, but it is very imperative to make sure that, yes, you have the facts, yes, you fact check, but your voice and your storytelling ability and the way in which you make things flow will stand out a lot in this industry.
So kind of getting into our discussion topics for tonight. Before you actually do the interview that you need for the article, how do you guys prep? How do you prepare to get a great interview out of whatever your story is on? And I guess we can go backwards, Deshonda.
The first thing that I do when I know that I'm going to interview somebody is I always watch their previous interviews. Always. Like I binge watch it, like how people do a good episode on Netflix or Hulu. I binge watch previous interviews. I always read their previous interviews. I always listen to their sound bites or podcast interviews because I want to know what I know about them and I want to know about what I don't know about them. Like I'll sometimes backtrack on different interviews and be like, well, this was a good question, but they didn't really answer the question, or that question was cool, but they should have asked it this way. Like, for example, if somebody says, Issa Rae, what's your favorite food? She might say macaroni and cheese, whatever. I'm just making it up, right? But if I were to interview Issa Rae, I would say, oh, in a previous interview, I don't know, in a complex interview, you said that your favorite food is macaroni and cheese. What do you love the most about macaroni and cheese? Or is there like a sense of nostalgia? Like, what's your first mac and cheese memory? Like, I want to make sure that I get details that nobody else would think to ask. And that's how I prepare my interview questions, because I like to make sure that it's personalized. I won't say that anybody could sit across from a chair and ask a celebrity a question, but anybody can sit across a celebrity and ask them a question, right? But interviewing is a skill. Interviewing requires research. So I always encourage you to look back on previous interviews that they did, take note of what you know, take note of what you don't know, and take note of what you want to
know. Sydney?
Yeah, I agree 1,000% with that. And that's exactly how I prepare too. Just like reading all their previous interviews, watching their previous interviews. So you're not asking the same questions too. Like some questions you're going to ask like, oh, how'd you, I don't know, tell me about your upbringing or something that's kind of standard in every interview. But that's something that I do too. And also like, because we're talking about entertainment, get familiar with their work too. If it's an actress, maybe watch a movie or two or a TV show. If it's an artist, listen to their music, especially if you're going to interview them about a recent album that they did. Like get familiar with the music and maybe collaborators that they had on it. And also just like draft great questions too. So that's like what I do. Oh, also another thing is I've been trying to do more of my, because we're not like, I don't know, we're kind of like slowly getting back into doing things in person, but I've been trying to do more of my interviews via Zoom or in person as much as possible, because I found it helpful when artists or actresses or whoever can put a face to your name, because you never know what's going to happen later in life. They might run into you. And that's a great way to make connections. Like the goal of this is not to like get famous or anything or become friends with these people, but it's just a great way. So later in life, like they might request you for an interview. So
we'll go ahead with Ruth, and also see you put something in the chat as well.
Just echoing Deshonda and Sydney, like I think being a good journalist, that's just doing research, right? Critical thinking, doing your work beforehand, doing your due diligence. And so I was like, don't be like that white Australian reporter who didn't listen to Adele's 30 album before interviewing her. And it was a whole thing today. It's just egregious. And I know that's not something that we would ever do or that we would have the luxury of doing and still keeping our job. But yeah, just echoing a lot of the sentiments before, I think it's just so important to do your research. And for me, I think coming from, having done breaking news and having done more long form stories, I think sometimes for press junkets, which can be very short and very tight on time, it's important to, sure, maybe start with a softball, but definitely get into the meat of what you want. Once you start getting comfortable with them, maybe the second or third question, because you have like a 15-20 minute window. And sometimes some of these artists and acts are quite long-winded, right? So they may take 3 to 5 minutes to answer a question, right? And so, but when it comes to longer stories or profiles. Like I said, do research on them. I have a story coming up about one of the characters in Insecure and how he's making his own short film, right? And him talking about being Haitian American. So doing research on their upbringing or the things that matter to them and their character and looking at previous interviews. I think another thing is just echoing what Sydney said. I think I've actually stayed in touch with a lot of sources that I actually interviewed in undergrad, and being able to follow them now. I interviewed the first Black rodeo queen of Arkansas for a story I did in undergrad for class. Then I contacted her again when I was interning at the Today Show to talk about like the Black Yeehaw agenda, right? And the real life Black cowgirls and cowboys. I recently did a story about Black women in country music, wrote about this artist from Durham, North Carolina. She's a Black woman, Camille Parker. I wrote about her in undergrad. And then when I wrote the story for HuffPost, I reached back out to her and some other Black women in country to have this roundtable, right? So it's very cool to be able to not only follow your sources, but kind of have a professional sort of camaraderie and a professional relationship so that they feel comfortable when they talk to you. They feel that you can portray their story in a way that makes sense, but also is doing them justice as well. So yeah, just things to think about.
Okay. And so can you guys also touch base, because everyone on here, we're in college. So can you touch base on your journey? So what kind of things did you guys do get while in college to get to where you are now? And what advice can you give us? Let's start with Deshonda.
I will say that I'll speak to y'all from the perspective of somebody who's been out for a couple years and things that I wish I would have done. Of course, you know, keep in contact with people. I can safely say, much like Ruth said, a lot of the people that I made connections with in college really did help me out in ways that I did not, you know, expect it to. I would also say that while you're in college, these are your formative years, right? Like college is supposed to be the best time of your life. It really was for me. And the thing that I would encourage everybody to do, which I also did as well, is for you to try everything at least once. I think that it's very important to get a sense of what you love to do as a writer, because like, for example, Ruth said that, you know, she did breaking news. I realized very early on in my writing career, breaking news was not my thing. I thought it was cute. I thought it was great. I wanted to read from a teleprompter and wear the blazer and everything like that and look cute on as an anchor, but that's just not my thing. I realized that, you know, while I could do sports, while I could write about it, that's not my passion. So really try your best to explore things that you didn't think you tried. Try to take some production classes, because you never know, as a multimedia journalist, that can make you a very necessary asset to any team. Don't be afraid to take some production classes. Don't be afraid to, you know, fool around with the camera. See if you can take some sports journalism classes. See if you can take some editing classes. Try to make yourself as well-rounded as possible, because editing is one thing, but if you're an asset in many different facets of journalism, that's going to make you even more competitive and more necessary to a team. Avid is very hard. iMovie, you know, I suck at iMovie, truthfully, but to know that I can do a little something with it, that may put me a little bit above the next guy. So don't be afraid to try out different styles of writing, different avenues of writing. Maybe you want to write a culture piece. Maybe you want to write an op-ed. If you know that you're very opinionated, try your hand at some op-eds or some personal essay writing. If you know that you are a movie or TV buff, you know, look into how people at Bustle write. Look into how people at Teen Vogue write. Maybe see their style of writing. Try to mimic it at, you know, your publication at your school. But don't be afraid to try things that seem outlandish or out of reach, because you never know where it's going to land or how people are going to receive it. So don't be afraid to try anything once.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. Like I know in grad school for me, I took like a graphic design class and a coding class, not thinking I would really use it, but I literally use like InCopy and HTML as an assistant right now in our CMS. So definitely try everything, like get as many skills as you can. I would also say write a lot and read a lot and try to freelance and just get involved with school magazines or papers. And also lean on your peers, get to know the people around you, your classmates that are doing the same majors as you and maybe not. Because you never know where the people around you will end up. You don't know who's going to end up being the editor-in-chief of this, and you can always say, oh, we like knew each other in college, we go way back. So I would say that. So like, I think there's like a term for that, like horizontal networking, just kind of like networking with the people who are on the same level as you, because you guys are the future of journalism. So but also that doesn't mean don't vertical network either. Definitely, if you read an article by a writer that you like, find a way to reach out to them and tell them. Like, I know at least like entertainment journalists, in my experience on Twitter, everyone's on Twitter and people are pretty lax, and they don't mind if you follow them or DM them and say like, hey, I liked your article. And apply for editorial internships, lean on your professors. That's what they're there for. I know David was telling me about his editing process. So just lean on every sort of resource you have, and just like be nice to each other and help each other out along the way.
Yes, can you repeat the question? I want to make sure I like address it directly.
Oh no, of course. The question was, what did you do in college to get to where you are now? And how can you give us advice about?
Yeah. I think Sydney really harping on, I think freelancing for me was the big thing. I will say, like I was telling Melvin in our group, I didn't enjoy my time at Carolina. And so there were about 5 teachers that I was like, I ride for them, they ride for me. Like one of my teachers is also my coworker at the Huffington Post now, which is great. But at the same time, I very quickly identified there's not a lot of room for culture reporting or entertainment reporting in school, in our academic structure at Carolina. It was very much like sports, broadcast, PR, etc. And if you don't want to do those things, you were very much like, all right, you got to figure it out. Good luck, Charlie. So for me, I think, again, I was like, what publications have that? I didn't enjoy the flagship campus newspaper. It was too white and rife with issues. And so I was like, I'm going to be a part of the Bridge and do this thing for women of color, non-binary people of color, and be a part of the inaugural fashion magazine. So that's about that networking across. But from there, making sure that I was applying for internships, making sure that I was tuned into things that the national chapter of NABJ was doing. One summer I was supposed to be a part of the NBC News cohort, but because of the pandemic that fell through. But still having earned that internship allowed me to apply again to be a part of the Today Show, right? So finding those avenues, I think something I've learned in the very arduous job process was that student organizations are good, but they do want to see your professional work. They do want to see your bylines. They do want to make sure that you can write at a professional level. So using those student orgs as a conduit to get internships. And then after a certain point, like connecting with writers online that you like their work, like, hey, how did you do that? How do you pitch, right? I think for me, something that was really integral, I can't find it on their website now, but Melissa Kimball has a site called, I think, Black Creators, had this sort of like how to freelance guide, and it was called First Draft. And I looked at that and then asked friends who did freelance, like, how do y'all do this, right? And so continuously pitching editors. I pitched editors at Teen Vogue 4 times before something finally stuck. And then using that and building upon that so that when you're applying for jobs, you're like, look, I have these professional bylines. You can start with your student org and then go local, then go national. But I think that's really, really key. And that's something that schools are not teaching us how to do. And then like Sydney said, like, don't be afraid to reach out to somebody. And I think that has been crucial for me, is like finding mentors outside of Carolina, outside of North Carolina, and in those internships, maximizing my time with the people there. It's so cool to say this, but one of my favorite people, Polly Arungu, she's the founder of Black Women Photographers. And I knew her before she created the platform because I met her when I was at Radiolab when we were at WNYC. So being able, again, to be like, oh yeah, I know this person, and keep up with them. So I think that's crucial. Just internships, reaching out for mentorship, freelancing. So yeah.
Thank you guys for those great tips. We will now be moving forward into our Q&A session. Into our Q&A session. So if anybody has a question, you can go ahead and come off mute and ask your question. Okay, Jerry, you can go ahead.
Hi. So my question is for all the panelists. Kind of just share your like welcome to the industry moment, and how did you like overcome it and it help you like now like to where you are.
Okay. To repeat his question, he said, define your welcome to the industry moment and how did you overcome it? Or if it wasn't a bad moment, can you discuss that moment that you're like, oh, I'm really in this career?
I guess I'll start. My welcome to the industry moment was very backwards. In like summation, I started off at Spelman as a biochemistry major with a dual degree engineering concentration. Clearly that did not work out for me. But then I switched to PR because I knew that I loved writing and I knew that I loved storytelling. I just didn't know that journalism was something that was actually within reach, because at the time Spelman didn't have a journalism concentration, or let alone like anything that like remotely focused on media. So I was just like, okay, I'll try PR. And ironically enough, my first two clients were Beja Rodriguez, who was in the OMG Girls, if y'all remember who they are, and Lotto, back when she was Miss Mulatto. So those two were my very first clients. And what I did is I found out that every time I would pitch my clients to certain media outlets, what they would oftentimes do is when they would interview my clients, they would take like the smallest piece of information that they would say, or like the smallest quote, and run with it. And I realized that as a publicist, though I have control of my client, I didn't have control of the stories being told about my client. And I didn't like that whatever my clients were doing was taken so negatively, or they weren't really spinning it so positively. So all the relationships that I had built with journalists, all the relationships that I had made, all the networking that I had done, I was able to say, hey, like I do have a background in writing because I worked at the Maroon Tiger. I had my own radio show at Clark Atlanta University. Can I start writing for y'all? And what I did is I first did freelancing for the Rap Fest, which is I want to say, I don't even know if their website's still running. Let's just say it is. It's still running. And I served as the interim editor-in-chief for about half a year there when I was about, I want to say I was like 23 or 24 when I was the interim editor-in-chief there. And from there, I used my clips because I started off doing this podcast called Women's History Month's She Got This. And I did an interview with Patience Foster, who was previously Cardi B's publicist. I talked to Maddie May of Envy. And then from there, I got introduced to Hello Beautiful. So from Hello Beautiful is where I got to do different celebrity interviews like Tika Sumpter, a bunch of other people that I can't even like remember now. And then I moved on to XO Nicole, and then from XO Nicole moved to Revolt TV. And all that to say that where I am now started as an introduction to me finding a need in the industry. I hated the fact that not only my clients, but so many Gen Z and millennial talents did not get the story that they deserved. Because oftentimes, you know, us young folks, we get the negative connotation of we're lazy, or we think that everything is easy, or we're so this or we're so that. And I hated that. So I believed in my mind, and I still believe in my mind, that who better to tell a story about Gen Z than Gen Z? Who better to tell a story about a millennial than a millennial? So I would always tell people, like, if you're going to tell a story about my client, at least let me write the story. I'll give you the byline, just publish it under your name, but you're not going to run with anything else. It's going to go through me. And then from there, I realized that I didn't like having somebody else take my credit because, you know, not for nothing, excuse my language, I don't want anybody taking credit for my shit. So if I'm writing this, I want that to be under my name. And then I realized I could do this. So let me go ahead, write these articles. Y'all pay me what I'm worth, because that takes a lot of time too for you to negotiate pay. I realized that there was a need that I can fulfill. And I honestly encourage everybody to do that when you first start writing, because maybe you see something that 17 doesn't have that you know that you can offer. Or maybe you see something that Blavity doesn't have that you can offer. Maybe you think they need more video content. Maybe you think they need a podcast. Maybe you think they need a culture section. Maybe you think they need more LGBTQ plus content. Whatever it is, there's nothing wrong with saying, I see that you're missing this, and I want to be the person to give it to you. Don't say it like that, but say it as though like you are a necessity to the team, because while you're filling out these outlets, these outlets are also low-key looking for things that they could do to make us be part of their audience. Because as people get older, they're going to try to start making their publications more attainable to a younger audience, because as it was said before, I'm not sure if it was Sydney or Ruth, but we are the next generation. So they want to make sure that they're catering to us. So there's nothing wrong with saying, I see the stories that y'all are telling, and it was cute for like 5 years ago, but I want to help y'all move with the times now. So that was my introduction to the industry.
Sydney, if you want to go ahead and just talk about your welcome to the industry moment. And if anybody else has any questions, just be sure to raise their hand. So Sydney, you can go ahead.
Yeah, so Deshonda gave a super deep answer. Mine is like not like that at all, but I think for me it was like when I learned to like make an invoice and submit that, I kind of was like, wow, I'm like really doing this. I'm really in here. And then just like getting the payment months later, because God knows that takes X amount of years to come, or months rather. But so it's kind of like that when I learned how to make an invoice and submit that. But also I guess like when I did my Billboard internship, which I did from March to May of this year, I started to like, they give you like a Billboard email, or like they gave me a Billboard email, and I got like a work computer. So I felt like a actual employee there rather than an intern running around like doing busy work for everyone who works there. And just like getting emails from publicists and PR people, like, so I guess like being sought out versus me having to always chase my stories and things like that. That was kind of like an eye-opening experience for me. And also going off of something Deshonda said, like recognizing if there's something that you want to add to a publication that you're at. I actually have my own column now at Billboard. So Billboard really lacks coverage of like emerging and rising artists. We're like, with our charts and everything, we talk a lot about mainstream artists. So me and our R&B and hip hop reporter, we co-write a column every week where we highlight 10 emerging artists, like songs that came out in the past week. And so that's been like a really good experience for me. Just like I said, just getting more people aware of who I am, and, just being able to champion rising artists and emerging artists, because I know what it's like to be an emerging writer. So like, why not kind of help someone else out on that front? And I'm still pretty new at this, but that's my answer for that.
I think my like welcome to journalism moment. Well, first, I think I'd always enjoyed writing, but coming from, a Black immigrant family, a Nigerian family, it's very much like engineering, medicine, law, like those are your options. And I'm still considering law, but and I was really stuck on medicine. And then I took Bio 101 at UNC, and I said, this is not working. Got my first D, and I said, we got to go right now. And I basically told my parents, I was like, I've always been good at writing, always loved writing. Either I do this journalism thing and keep my grades up, or we can keep forcing a circular peg in a square hole. It's just not going to work. And so I switched over, and I wish I switched over earlier, even though my Carolina experience wasn't great. I think it definitely would have saved my GPA. But that, I think for me, it was just like, okay, I'm going to do this whole hog and go in. And junior year, I was a part of Teen Vogue's 2020 Youth Voter Committee. And so I was with a bunch of 11 other individuals across the United States, talking about our perspectives on the election, right, as youth. And so that, gave me an opportunity to contribute, but also direct access to the editor. And I kept pitching her back and forth, et cetera. Pitched a story about Elizabeth Warren, and when she's setting up office in Raleigh, she's not engaging with Carolina's Indigenous population. And if you don't know, North Carolina has the largest Indigenous population on the eastern side of the Mississippi, right? So what does that mean for this woman who claims this identity to not engage? And that got shot down. And I did another story. I wanted to pitch something else about, I can't remember. I pitched like 4 times, and the 4th one was after the murder of activist Oluwatoyin Salau, about the adultification of Black girls and the strong Black woman trope. And that was an opinion article. And then that went viral, was on Apple News and all these things. And so that was very dear and personal to me. And it was after kind of the onslaught of police brutality, or within that frame, and just talking about the violence that Black women and Black femmes experience. And so that for me was just such a like a gratifying, very personal moment. And then from there, kind of echoing what Deshonda and Sydney said, finding things that Teen Vogue was lacking, be it pop culture coverage or political coverage. I know I wrote a story about like the disregard for Black immigrants and not acknowledging that intersection, especially in politics. And then from there, just keep moving and pitching things at internships, et cetera, and making sure that I'm getting a variety of things under my belt that really fall into culture commentary and entertainment. I think that was a big moment. But the other thing I think might be like when I was at the LA Times and reported on the Black TikTok strikes and went viral, but lots of engagement, both good and bad. You have a lot of vitriol on the internet. And I was like, oh, we in this thing. Like people are upset, which is good. People are talking. But yeah, so I think those were kind of my moments.
Okay. Does anybody else have a question that they would like to add off the top of their head? Okay, if not,
I have a question. Sorry.
okay, you're fine.
So I don't know if this was answered already, but we were talking about this in our group as well with Ruth as well. She was talking about how schools don't really focus on culture and art. So I wanted to ask, like, what are some tips or some things or some like maybe programs to go into for people who do want to go into that business instead of going into the typical business of sports writing and news writing?
I will say that as someone who was extremely self-taught when I first started in the industry, there is nothing that the internet cannot teach you. I am a proud graduate of YouTube University. I learned so much from YouTube, whether it's how to properly write or format your interview questions, whether it's how to set up lighting for Zoom, whether it's like a quick tutorial on Photoshop. There's literally nothing that you can't do on YouTube. And I believe Sydney said it actually, read a lot. Like whether it's the newspaper, whether it's magazines, whether it's blogs, if you want to go into blogging instead of just going straight into hard news journalism, make sure that you read a lot, because just as much news as you're putting out, whether it's aggregated news posts that are 300 words or whether it's a long op-ed or a featured reported piece, that's as much news as you should be consuming a day. I make sure that whenever I wake up, the first thing I do is read. I read for at least an hour because I want to get a sense of what's happening in the world that I'm writing about, as well as the worlds that are around me. Because just as important as what's happening with the Grammy nominations today, Malcolm X's daughter died. I want to make sure that I know everything that's happening, because you never know how things can coincide. If I have an opportunity to interview Yara Shahidi, for example, knowing that she is very socially engaged, I might ask her questions not only about the upcoming season of Grownish that was just announced. I might ask her questions about the death of Malcolm X's daughter, since she's so into that world and community engagement. So you never know what's going to intertwine with what. Make sure you do all of your research about things that may be necessary in your field, because as I mentioned before, you may not want to be the typical pen and paper journalist. Maybe you want to go more into vlogging or be more of a multimedia journalist. There's nothing that a quick class on coursehorse.com cannot teach you. I actually learned a lot about public speaking and a lot about broadcast journalism and presentation feedback through simple classes that I was able to sign up for virtually. So I would encourage you to do as much research as you can, and also lean on people that you see are doing the things that you're doing. If you know, for example, that you want to write more in the music realm, you obviously know that Sydney is a good person to go to, right? So there's nothing wrong with asking people that you look up to, hey, like, what did you use? Or go into discussions like this and you see maybe someone like me who may not be in the field that you want to be in specifically, but if you see that I've done something similar, there's nothing wrong with asking people who are not only atop from you, but are also adjacent to and vertically, aligned with you.
Thank you so much.
And I think for me, I was going to say, like, answering that question about what do you do when you don't have a strong academic structure to support what you're trying to do, right? When the institution is just like, we're very much like this one way, we're going to funnel you this way. I think for me, I knew coming to Carolina, I was like, I know I enjoyed writing. I just didn't know I didn't want to major in it yet. But I was like, if there's no fashion magazine, like I'm going to start a fashion column. I was like, I didn't know what the DTH was at the time, but I was like, if I join the DTH, like I'm going to ask to start a fashion column. It's like, because why not? I was like, if that has not been created, and funny enough, like the fashion magazine was started a year before I came in, which was great, just right on time. And I knew, I was like, I enjoy fashion and culture. I was like, there's room for this. Durham is literally right down the road. There's rich Black history there. They have so many fashion exhibits at the NCMA. I was like, why not, or create this sort of like going around campus and asking people about their fits, that type of thing. And so fortunately the space was already created, but even then I knew that like on the bridge, making sure that we have like a fall lookbook, right? Being the creative director in that regard, working as a stylist for Kultura, but also even seeking out stories. Like I wrote a story about Mizizi, which is this like African athleisure brand made by Paco Esando. He's a first generation Ghanaian American. Wrote about his brand, wrote about how he came up with the jerseys, etc., from a Black Lives Matter jersey to Afro-Latino jerseys, etc., just like repping the year of independence and the colors and the flag. And then like a year later, he got interviewed by Vogue, which I still think is really cool that I found that before Vogue did. But just having that kind of tenacity and being like, this is a cool story, I want to pitch it. Like this is how it correlates with our campus or identity or these conversations, and just kind of being dogged in that. And even then, like even blogging, right? Blogging. And this is where freelancing also comes in. Like if you think that there's a particular rising designer that you want to cover before they get hot, like go pitch a publication that you're familiar with. And I think it's important to do your research on these publications. Like be like, look, Hanifa just had this fashion show. I know that so-and-so is on the rise. Like I just interviewed Antoine Manning of Homage Gear, talking to him about the next It bag, right? Like having an eye for that and not being afraid to pitch, or at least write it for your campus publication, or finding your own avenue, and then kind of using that as like proof of bylines, right? Or even if you see that there's this sort of, I know the NCMA had a Senegalese fashion exhibit. You can go to Indie Week and be like, hey, I think we should cover this. Indie Week is a local publication in the Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill Triangle for Deshaun and Cindy. And so you can just go to local outlets and be like, look, I see this thing is happening. Like I'm a student, I would love to cover it, etc. So I think it's just a matter of like creating it, going after it, and then branching out little by little, and using that as a means to like, when you get into that internship, then you can kind of do what you actually want to do. So I think that was crucial for me with the Today Show. Radiolab was a long form science journalism podcast. I didn't know it had won a Peabody when I applied. I just applied. But I think that gave me the skills, right? And the connections, because I connected with Polly, and then she allowed me to be her photographer's assistant at Afropunk. And she helped me get a byline in Gothamist, which is under the same parent company, right? And so I was covering Afropunk style, right? All because I made that connection with someone at the internship. And then from there, I later got the Today Show. And from there, I was able to do things like Black-owned brands, right? 5 Black-owned shopping directories for you to shop from this Black History Month or year round, right? And kind of building up that skill. So it takes some time before you can do what you want to do, but just still getting the ball rolling early and at least trying it. So yeah. I hope that answered your question. I know that was long.
No, yes, it did. Thank you so much.
Cindy, did you want to add anything to that? Or
Honestly, I didn't have much to add. Similar to Ruth, like if it doesn't already exist, create it, or forge that path for yourself. I know for me, like I didn't really know that I could make a career out of music journalism until I joined a hip hop magazine that we had on campus. And I just joined as like, I remember like sophomore year going to one of the meetings, not knowing anything, just kind of sitting there as a general member. And then I just stuck with it and got to know the e-board, and eventually what became executive editor my senior year. So, and also like with our school newspaper, our music column was dying. So I just asked them like, hey, here's a writing sample. Can I be a music columnist? And I just kind of went hard with that and just like forged my own path during undergrad. And then in the real world, kind of like pinpointing those music publications that I really liked and seeing like who was on the masthead and seeing like who the editors are, and kind of like making note of that, and then reading those people, and then reaching out and applying to those internships when they are available. So
Well, that's great. Does anybody else have a question? If not, I wanted to ask, so what are kind of the struggles that you guys have faced when, because all you know your voice and you know your column, but like starting out, what's kind of struggles that you had to go through while trying to push a story that you're passionate about? So say they don't want to hear about the good work that Lala was doing, or about your emerging artists, or about the Senegalese fashion exhibit. How do you continue to push those stories to make sure they get out and that they're heard?
That's a really great question. I think this resonates with me particularly because I remember distinctly pitching like Elsa Majimbo. I don't know if y'all remember her. She eats chips, has her sunglasses on. She's Kenyan, makes those really witty videos, and pitching her. And now all of a sudden, all these outlets, and they said no, but now all of a sudden, all these outlets have her as a host, etc. I think she was featured on like High Snobiety. And I was like, damn. I was like, okay, was I just like not the right person? Was it just too young, etc.? Or was the timing not right? So in those instances, I think it's just a matter of like sometimes waiting, or sometimes going about and doing it yourself if you want to cover it for, again, a campus thing, or even having your blog or your own Substack, right? And sharing that content just to make sure you'd be like, I had it on my radar. I have proof that I have an eye for these things, irregardless of whether y'all want to take it or not. And so it's a little bit hard. I'm not gonna lie, but don't be dismayed. I think it's just like keep going and find your way and find your means of doing it if you want to loop it into something later. So yeah, a short answer, but it's just like, just keep pitching and keep bringing it up. Yeah, I think for me, like you can't get bogged down by like the fact that they took it away from you or they just didn't accept it. You can't be like, was I not the right person, or etc. It's like, because you came up with the idea. But definitely keep being persistent. So yeah.
Thank you. Anybody else? Sydney or Deshonda?
I'll say very much similar to what Ruth said. It's really hard at first in the industry because everything that you write and everything that you pitch is like your baby. Like every idea is a great idea, but you're gonna get a lot more no's than yeses. Unfortunately, that's just the realism of the situation. A lot of the times you're gonna get no. Maybe it's because the publication is, hesitant about bringing on new writers. Maybe they don't have the budget. Maybe what you're pitching is just not a fit. You're going to get a lot of no's, but it's very important to not take it personally. At first, when I got a lot of no's, I'll be like, well, what do you mean no? Like, this is a great pitch. Like, are you joking? Like, why would you not want to accept this? But then after I got out of my own feelings as a young writer and I pushed my ego aside, I would first always ask, okay, well, thanks for taking the time to read it, but why not? Like, is it not timely enough? Are you looking for something more evergreen? Do you not like the format I'm proposing? Like, what's wrong with it? And then once they told me, why they couldn't accept it, I would either offer a different format and to work with the editor on something else, or I would just say, okay, heard you. And I would just take it somewhere else. So there's nothing wrong with taking an idea and moving it elsewhere. Just because you pitch something for one publication and they say no, that doesn't mean that's where the idea has to die. The idea never has to die in an email pitch, right? So you never know if maybe a pitch that you may send to me for Essence may not be a good pitch, but it may do numbers on Billboard. It may do amazing on HuffPost. Before you pitch, and it's funny because I was telling somebody this a couple of weeks ago, when you pitch something, it's important to look for where you want the pitch to land. Because if you pitch an amazing style story, it could fit in Essence, but maybe InStyle might want it more, or maybe Glamour might want it more. It's not that your pitch is bad. It's not that your pitch is horrible. It's probably just not the proper fit. So it's really important to make sure that you do the research on the publications that you're aiming for as well. Because 9 times out of 10, it's not that you're a bad writer. It's not that you're not skilled. I'm not going to take away from your talent. It's probably just not a good fit for us. So never let anything discourage you, because oftentimes, even if you get an amazing celebrity interview opportunity, say if somebody comes to you for the opportunity to interview, I don't know, Jay Ellis from Insecure, because we kept saying Insecure a lot. If you get the opportunity to interview Jay Ellis and you go to an Essence and we say, well, he's great and we love him. But no, it's not to say that you can't interview him. It's saying you can't interview him for us. And if you have your own personal platform, there's nothing to say that Jay Ellis may not say yes to you interviewing him for your blog or for your vlog, because I know a lot of journalists who do really well on the sites that they write for the publications that they write for, but they also have a very booming personal brand where they also do celebrity interviews and they also do fashion show reviews, or they also do music reviews. So it's also imperative to not only make sure that you do these amazing things for the brand that you're working for, but know that aside from the brand that you work for, you are a brand within yourself. Like, who is Sydney aside from Billboard? Who is Deshonda aside from Essence? Who is Ruth aside from HuffPost? Because God forbid if these publications were to go under, what do you have to stand on? Make sure that you are working on your personal brand, and make sure that you have a voice, and make sure that you have that tenacity, because that's what's going to make you far. And I agree with what Ruth said as well. Hunter Harris is a prime example. She's actually working on the upcoming season of Gossip Girl. Like, it's imperative to make sure that as a journalist, she can't be touched as a journalist. But also, if she wasn't writing for the people that she was writing for, she would still be Hunter Harris.
Absolutely.
So make sure that you don't attach yourself to these brand names, because it's easy to do that. Make sure that you're working to make sure that these publications are a fit for you and your brand, as opposed to you making yourself fit for these brands, because you're going to last longer than a lot of these brands do.
And I wanted to add so much to that. You made so many excellent points, Deshonda. I think another person, Hunter Harris, she was originally at Vulture. Now she has her own Substack called Hung Up. She does critiques of, like, she'll just do roundups of great television, specifically Succession. I love Elite White Mess, so Succession is like my thing at the moment. But she's incredible, and she's now done covers for GQ. She'll do, like, people are literally commissioning her for things. Another person is Darian Simone Harvin, who's a beauty writer.
Love her.
Incredible. She's incredible. She's written for the LA Times and covered Lauren London, because Darian herself is from LA, and she's built up her own platform as a speaker on just like the intersection of beauty and politics. She knows that's her bread and butter, and she does that with Allure, et cetera. Like, she covered, like, Joe Biden, or somebody was releasing some sort of Biden beauty line in order to, like, get voter participation up. It was very strange, but just covering that niche. And so it's just so important. And by having a brand, you don't have to be super, like, uptight on social media. Like, Hunter Harris is super funny, like, very, very funny. I don't want to say unhinged, but, like, it's hilarious. You know what I'm saying? So, like, you can have personality and still just be like, hey, I just wrote this thing, you know? Another thing about, like, shopping pitches around, I think that's so important, because sometimes you can end up in a bidding war. One place will be like, hey, I'll pay you $300 for this, and the other place will be like $400, and you're like, well, you know what I'm saying? Like, exactly. And I think another thing for me, like, I'll never forget, when you pitch, sometimes you'll be surprised. Like, they'll come back to you, be like, hey, that didn't work out, but what about this? I distinctly remember, like, pitching Teen Vogue about this sort of phenomenon I noticed specifically on Grownish, and also I think it was the Bold Type, but what they would do is they would put these progressive Black characters across from Republican love interests. And I'm like, why do y'all do that? Right. And I remember pitching, because what happened on the Bold Type is this Aisha, who's Black Australian, she played like a Black lesbian character, and they put her character across from a Republican. And she wrote a letter just being like, I think that was a poor writing decision, especially with the times that we're in. And it was, of course, during the summer of 2020. And so I pitched something on exactly. It was just so much, right? Aaron was dating Anna, who's this Cuban Republican, and he's a student activist of the show. And I was like, this wouldn't actually happen. Like, I was just like, I don't understand why politics only goes so far in Hollywood. And that was kind of the pitch. And they're like, we already have someone working on it. Because somebody already pitched it just before I did. Time was of the essence after Aisha released her letter. But then they came back to me and they're like, would you like to do a story on these teachers in Georgia that went viral for their COVID music video? I'm originally from Georgia. And so that was a story that was very dear and near to me. So you never know what could happen, even after you get turned down. Just like, they might call you back and be like, hey, do you want to do this thing? So keep the faith, keep shopping it around. Don't be married to one publication, and just make sure that you're writing and, like, you're building yourself up. So yeah.
Cindy, was there anything you'd like to add? If not, it's okay.
I have nothing to add. At this point, I'm just kind of like listening to these two.
No worries. Is there anybody else that has a question? If not, I got plenty of questions for y'all. Go ahead, Rose Glee. Was you?
Oh, okay. I had a question. So I wanted to know, like, what were some of your biggest inspirations from like the journalism industry that you looked up to while in college or even now?
I would say some of my biggest influences obviously were, some of the bigger radio heads, especially because I went to school in Atlanta. Because I went to Spelman, I really looked up to the Jazzy McBees and the Tanya Moores of the world. But it has shifted and it has grown. Two of my biggest influences, which I can say I'm honored to have even been in the same room as, that I've interviewed, have been Angela Rye and Soledad O'Brien. Those are two extremely badass women in this industry that they're untouchable. Like, there's nothing you can say to either of them. You can't say that you don't like their work because they're literally everywhere. They're amazing. But some of my biggest inspirations right now are my peers. We talked throughout this entire panel about networking across. I've learned so much from people who are my age and younger, because I'm only 25 turning 26. I've learned so much from people who I've worked with, from people that I've mentored. I can strongly say that one of my biggest inspirations, if you haven't looked her up, her name is Blake Newby, and she is an amazing style and beauty writer. And I'm blessed to say that she's an associate of mine and she's a colleague of mine, and she's only my age and she's a mentor of mine. Blake Newby is one of the hardest working journalists in this game, not just in style, not just in fashion, not just in beauty, but for her to be 26 years old and to run the entire style and fashion and beauty division at Essence is incredible. She is without a doubt going to be the next Julie Wilson of this world. If she's not, then I have questions. I think that it's very important to look towards the people that you work with, because a lot of times, we look up to people, but what about looking at people? My best friend, her name is Shaw Ravine Spencer. She's an amazing beauty journalist. She's written for Health, Shape. She used to work at Good Morning America. She has bylines in Covitor, and she's an extremely strong writer. Now, while some of these names that I'm throwing out may not be household names, like, a Soledad O'Brien or an Angela Rye, that doesn't take away from their talent. So when people are looking for inspiration, I would absolutely encourage people to look at people who are within your circle. It can be the editor-in-chief at your school newspaper. It can be somebody who's a radio personality in your hometown. It could be any of us who are on the panel. There's so much inspiration that you can draw from so many different people, because you never know what somebody can offer that maybe you can learn from.
I'd say for me, like some of my inspirations, like I look up to like Scotty Beam. She's just like killing it. Not even just on like a written journalism front, but she used to host a show in Revolt, and she has a show or a podcast with Sylvia Obell now on Netflix, and they have like a funny show right now called Get You and Me. So her, I would say, actually, she was my professor, not Scotty, but this next person was my professor in grad school, but Rawia Kamir. She has a crazy upbringing story. Like, she moved around a lot, and she was my professor in grad school, and she's teaching now, which is really cool. And she's also like, along with teaching, she's an associate editor at Pitchfork. So just like these women who look like me and are doing like not just the written journalism thing, but just like doing things outside of that and covering things that aren't just music, for me, I find inspiring, because I eventually want to get to a point where like I'm doing panels when this is my start, and doing more on camera work and possibly hosting things and just sort of doing all of that stuff. So I kind of look at people like Scotty Beam or Kiana Fitzgerald. I like her. She became a mentor to me actually in grad school. And so just like people like that, even Issa Rae, like hopefully I get to have dinner with her one day or something, but just people like that. Yeah, thank you. Gonna manifest it, but people like that who, yeah, I don't know, just kind of like create their own things for themselves when people are telling them no. It's just really inspiring for me.
Absolutely. I'm just seconding everything you all saying. I actually saw Scotty at an event I attended for like a Netflix, like The Harder They Fall. I didn't say anything, but I was like, that's Scotty Beam. I was just like, hi, just being like normal. I was like, hey girl. She looked great as per usual. But yeah, I think for me, I look to people, I sort of like old guard and new guard, right? But I think like I know somebody that I'm always super fascinated by is Kasia Minor. She was like the first Black editor-in-chief ever at Condé Nast, and she was at Brides magazine, I want to say like 2013. And she was a Howard Law grad, and I'm just very interested in her transition from law to journalism, corporate law to journalism. But I think now she's like COO at Ebony, if I'm correct. But her journey is just very fascinating to me. I need to like connect on LinkedIn. I should actually probably DM her. But the person that really I think made me feel seen was Elaine Welteroth. I've been like reading Teen Vogue since 2015. Like I literally had covers under my bed. I featured it in like my graduation photos, etc. And I met her the day before my 20th birthday, which was super cool, during her book tour, which was just amazing and a very full circle moment. And I think much like what Sydney said, I admire that she has branched out, right? She wasn't forever will be. Absolutely. Like I admire that she has just branched out and she's created this name for herself, and she's just doing the damn thing. And I think she's talked a lot about how difficult it was kind of taking that leap and knowing when it was time to go. But even the people that followed after her, I mean, Lindsay Peoples-Wagner, I'm just so impressed with her and her work from Teen Vogue and returning back to the cut. I'm obsessed with Hunter Harris. I think she's just hilarious. I think she has just wonderful cultural commentary. And even looking at people like, her name is escaping me. It'll come back to me. But Kayla Greaves, who was like the style editor or the beauty editor at InStyle. I think she just does such an excellent job with her like 4C hair series. And I think that was just so important. Or Kathleen Breming, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, she's like with Canadian Refinery 29 Unbothered. I think she just has wonderful cultural commentary. So like looking at those people, but even like some of my counterparts and colleagues, like I work with Taryn Finley, who I've admired for a very long time. And I told her this, I was like, she was kind of like my onboarding buddy. And I told her, I was like, you don't know this, but like when I was hosting student org events, like we would use your roundtable that you hosted on colorism as like a reference point for us to discuss about. And it was like, thank you for the work that you produce. And she's just so cool. I've just been obsessed with her for a minute. So it's just cool to be her colleague, and she's like super dope. And even one of Sydney's colleagues, correct me if I'm like pronouncing her name wrong, but Haran Mamo?
Haran.
Yes, I just think she's just really cool, and she literally just profiled The Weeknd for like a cover story, which is so dope. I remember I like contacted her because I was just trying to pitch somebody a billboard, and she was super dope. And just a really good writer and great coverage of Afrobeats and the African continent at large. So like it's just kind of this distinction for me, but just finding people that they write like you want to write, they inspire you to dream bigger, but also like they're just doing the damn thing. I just think it's cool. So yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you guys. Does anybody else have a question that they would like to ask? Maybe somebody who just hopped on. Everybody's just saying, okay, oh wait. Do you have a question, Unique, or no? You're on mute.
Okay, I'm gonna wait.
Okay, I mean, ain't no need to wait. It's just first come, first serve. Yeah. Okay, well, I have a little filler question. So how do you guys track your growth as writers? Or just in the industry with your work, how do you track your growth? Like, do you set goals? Like, I want to publish this article, I want to have this to go viral, or I want to impact this many people. How do you track your growth as a writer or as a journalist?
That's a great question. I think for me, I'm not gonna lie, like when I was at the LA Times, that was really my first time doing breaking entertainment news, right? And so I did see like, I would have a top 10 story, like at least once or twice a week, screenshotting that, right? And I use that as leverage. It's a good thing with your internships, y'all. Any good feedback you get, screenshot intake so that you can use that as leverage when you want an extension or need an extension. Be like, hi, based on my performance, I think I'd be an asset to stay because I've done XYZ and I could continue doing this, blah, blah, blah. Like, because I was on the East Coast, because it was remote, thank God, I was like, I'm not going to go to LA on a journalist salary, intern salary either. But I was like, yeah, because I'm on the East Coast, while it's 5 a.m. over there, it's 8 a.m. here, I can scour the internet and see those trending stories on Hollywood Reporter and Variety from the night, the previous night, so that once everyone gets on, I'm like, I already know when to hop on the story. Like the Issa Rae, I wrote a story on Issa Rae's wedding announcement, and I was like, Issa Rae breaks the internet, and it cranked out in 30 minutes. And they were super impressed. I was like, well, because I was already on, right? I was at the gym, but like my friends now are already texting about it. You know what I'm saying? So, but keeping screenshots of your growth. I think for me, I try not to get bogged down by the numbers, but just like, what was I able to elicit in this story, right? And part of me is like, I wanted a profile. I want nice profiles. I want nice cultural commentary. I love to do like a dig in sort of opinion piece. And then of course, breaking news, right? So I got to profile one of the stars of the Kissing Booth. I got to do sort of this commentary piece on the implications of Dean Felicia Rashad, right? And her comments at Howard, and how did survivors feel about that? And that was a piece in which I literally went on the internet and found people and contacted sources and be like, hi, as Black women, as alumni and survivors, how do you feel about this, et cetera? And being very careful with it. And even the TikTok story, the Black TikTok piece, I was like, I see something happening. I pitched it. I was like, let's get a move on, right? So I have sort of, rather than numbers, even though those are important, I try and think of like, what's the writing style that I want to get out of it, right? I think for me, I would love to do like, I don't know, an investigative journalism piece now at HuffPost, right? Like now that I'm a publication that has probably more resources and all these things, I would love to do kind of like a 3-parter. So yeah, that's kind of how it clicks in my head. So yeah.
I think for me, similar to what Ruth was saying, like set goals and like jot it down, put it in your notes app, and just kind of like put those things that you want to achieve in the universe and manifest those profiles or interviews or cover stories or whatever. And as cringy as it is, I also sometimes go back to like my old work and read it, and then read what I'm like producing now, and I'm like, wow, like my writing style has changed so much. Like I structure sentences better and stuff like that. So those are a couple things that I do. I'm still like growing and learning too, so.
I will say I agree with both ladies. For one, going back into my work is very cringy. I will definitely go back to some of my old work and be like, yo, whoever let me write this needs to be fired because this is horrible. But I do like looking back on previous interviews that I've done because a lot of my work is profiles and features. So I would look back, say if I've interviewed Issa Rae like 3 times. So the first time I interviewed her, I would go back and be like, okay, Deshaunda, you could have asked her this. So now that you may have, let's say you have 20 minutes with her this time, last time you may have only had like 15, let's utilize those last 5 to our advantage, right? And then the third time I'll be like, all right, I got whatever I wanted to get from her that time. Let's just go all out. So how has my comfort level grown? Am I asking more, dig in deep questions? Because of course, when you interview somebody, it's more comfortable to tiptoe and be like, well, how are you doing? How'd you get part of this project? Because anybody can ask those questions, right? But I want to ask, what's the most controversial thing you've done? Or how did you feel when this went viral? Or something of that nature that, they typically wouldn't, tweet about or talk about on public radio. So I try to make sure that all the time that I get with that talent is necessary and also a good way to track my work. My dad actually put me onto one of these ways. The first way is I'm obsessed with LinkedIn. All of my work can be found on LinkedIn. LinkedIn to me is like Facebook to middle-aged white women. Like that is where I live. I absolutely love LinkedIn. All of my work, well, not all of it, but a good 80% of my work and the work that I'm most proud of is absolutely on LinkedIn. And if you do have a lot of bylines such as myself, and I'm pretty sure the young ladies that are on the panel as well, if you do have a lot of work, it's important to always have a link tree or some type of digital portfolio. That way, if you can't list everything, you'll have like some of the major places that you've written for. That way people can go straight to it. And I don't mean a singular interview. Make sure they go straight to your author page. That way, if you have like 20, 30, 40, 50 aggregated posts, bylines, whatever it is, they can just see all of that and they don't have to ask you for anything additional. And two, it's very easy to back things up into the cloud, right? But I am very big on having a jump drive now. I always write things in Google Notes, always. Like every interview I've ever done, Google Notes. But I always save it to a PDF and then I always move it to a jump drive because you never know what's going to happen to Google. You never know what's going to happen to the cloud. I want to make sure that no matter what I have, whether it's a Mac, whether it's an HP or a Dell, I can just plug it in and be like, all of my work is right there. It's always important to have a record because good thing and bad thing, we don't push pen to paper like people used to anymore. Everything is very digital, but we see what happens when the internet crashes. We see what happens when Instagram is down, when Twitter is down, when Facebook is down. If LinkedIn were to go under, which would honestly just make me go into a very, very deep depression, I know that my work would still live on a jump drive. I know that I would still have a Linktree, and I know that I still have various resumes and CVs that track my work. That way, no matter if I go off the grid completely, there's a way for somebody to find me. So always make sure that you have extra copies of things that you've done. And as you grow as a journalist, you're going to have 100, 200, 300 bylines before you know it, even if it's just aggregated news posts. Because as a writer, you're going to write a lot, but especially those ones that hit very hard and that are very timely. Maybe you wrote something about the Central Park Five getting exonerated in relation to When They See Us. Maybe you wrote something about the Grammy nominations this year, something that's timely and that's hard hitting and has an angle that maybe you haven't noticed anywhere else. Keep those pieces somewhere lock and key and very safe, because the internet can get bogged down all the time. And the more you search things, the more things will filter out. But make sure that you have your copy of everything. That way, if somebody asks for it, you can always just plug it in and be like, here you go.
Yeah, that is so crazy you just said that, like archiving, because Billboard, we just relaunched our site last week. So like none of my articles from before last week are up. So I'm praying they get migrated over to our new site so I can like save all of them as a PDF. But that's very important. PDF and archive your work, because you never know what will happen.
Never know.
I know when HuffPost Canada shut down, like several people lost their work. It was like several journalists. It's like, so when they try and apply to other outlets, it's like, if you don't have that, I mean, you're just gonna be like, I was at HuffPost Canada and I wrote this thing. Be like, so show it to me. Be like, I can't. Like, I literally can't. So
like, it sounds good.
Right. Be like, it's great, but can I read it? So yeah, absolutely. And I see that Kim has a question.
Yes, one of our professors, Dr. Smith, has a question. I guess it kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier, Ruth, about how sometimes some educational structures can be, academic structures can be stuck in their ways. So how can professors help getting more students interested in writing and fitting into their passions? Okay. Is that kind of along the lines of what you're asking, Mr. Smith, Dr. Smith? You're welcome to come off mute and correct me if I'm wrong. Dr. Smith, can you hear me? Okay, I'm sure he's on here, but we'll go with that.
Okay. All right, Dr. Smith. All right, so where are J school professors dropping the ball when it comes to producing more interest in writing? That's a hard question. I think it's hard being a J school professor, because I think if I can recall with the UNC's Hussman School, it is 60% PR, 40% actual journalism. Reason being is we are told that PR makes more money, which is the truth of the matter. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. I don't believe in that. It does. And so kids are like, well, I didn't go to school to be broke. Let me go do PR. Right. So I think that is a hard part. I know that sometimes it can be very difficult for students to feel, and I'm speaking from a UNC experience, but at large, I think sometimes journalism professors are very much like, okay, I want to funnel these kids into NBC, New York Times, et cetera, that they don't teach us how to freelance. They don't teach us about audience engagement, which honestly, when I graduated, the jobs that were open were social media and audience engagement, which I'm like, why are we not learning about this in school? Or I think journalism school students, we feel that by the time we finish, we don't know that, even though they have a video journalism background, I can do in-house video production for some place like Red Hat, right? I think for us as students and recent graduates, we do need to be shown a lot more options, that we don't feel stuck. And I think professors, I hope that they could be more open and letting us know, like, when we say journalism, we don't just mean like go into a newsroom. There's so many options and things you can do with the degree. Like, people talk about how transferable the degree is. So professors, please show us. I think that's really important. Like, I know for me personally, this actually leads into how I got my job, but top of senior year, I went to a journalism professor, Professor Kate Shepard, who's now my colleague. I was like, hey, we're graduating, we're in a pandemic, we're also in a recession in a very difficult, dwindling industry. As a graduating senior, we attend all these events that are like, talk to recent graduates who are from the class of 2015 or 2012, but they were graduating a stable, functioning job market. And I told my professor, I was like, look, I want to talk to Black 2008, 2009 grads. And I said that because that was the last recession, who are in culture and entertainment journalism, right? Who are in the fields that I want to be in, since we don't have that space at Carolina. So, she connected me to Erin Evans, who's now my editor. Long story short, now I work for her a year later. But I think it's so important for professors to try and use their networks to connect students to the people that are doing what they want to do, so that we don't feel like we're flailing. Because it's very easy to feel that way, to feel like, well, I got to get it myself since there's no real structure. So yeah, I think that's the big thing. If professors could kind of expand their minds and let students know that there are more options, and let students kind of explore, and also just connecting them to the appropriate resources and avenues. And then I see the second question, are you an entertainment journalist first or journalist first? I think one thing that the pandemic, I'm working in the midst of the pandemic, but a lot of people had said this in the industry, that without the little events and the press junkets and all the glitz and the glamour and the red carpets, you're a journalist, you're still covering entertainment, but it's you don't have all the little glitzy and glamorous things. So you got to make sure you love it. For me, I just entertainment journalism is journalism. I consider myself a journalist first. I think some of the biggest cases and that's something that, I will talk about this all day, is I think that culture is just as important as politics, culture and entertainment. Some of the biggest cases that we have seen intersecting with disability, such as Britney Spears's conservatorship case, or looking at the Me Too movement, or looking at labor rights with respect to the recent protests on sets and productions, or even looking at, I just wrote a story today for Native American Heritage Month about Indigenous representation in Hollywood, but how that omits Black natives, right? Because I think that culture is just as important in politics, and they go hand in hand. And so I would just consider myself kind of just a journalist first. And I think we need to take culture and entertainment as seriously as we do everything else. So long-winded answer, but yeah.
I'll go next. I'll answer the question in two parts, as Ruth did. For one, where professors are dropping the ball, and I'm going to speak from somebody who went to Spelman and there was absolutely no journalism program, and I had to go across the way and across the campus to go to Morehouse and Clark Atlanta's journalism and multimedia schools. I definitely will agree to say that when I went, it's either you do breaking news or you do sports. Maybe you do entertainment. Maybe every now and again, we'll have some celebrities come in from this show or that show, Empire or Star, and they'll come in and they'll talk to you. But that's as deep as we're getting. I think that it's very important to show that there is much more out there, because when I was in school, I knew that I wanted to be a journalist, but I didn't know that I could talk about beauty. I didn't know that I could talk about fashion. I didn't know that I could talk about entrepreneurship. I didn't know that I could talk about upcoming artists. I had no idea that all of these avenues exist. And I think that what happens sometimes is that we're so hell-bent on the structure, and we're so knee-deep in the grammar and the functionality of journalism that we forget about the creativity and the innovation in it, that there's so many different ways. Let's explore blogging, let's explore vlogging, let's explore multimedia journalism. As Ruth said, let's also explore, the do's and don'ts of freelancing, because let's be honest, freelancing is extremely ghetto. I wish that I knew a lot of things about freelancing back when I was 18, 19, 20, as opposed to learning it as it was happening to me when I was 23, 24, 25. So I think those essential skills that you wish you would have learned when you were younger are very important to teach the next generation now, because I would hate for people who are younger than me to fumble the bag in ways that I did because I didn't reach back and teach them what I wish I would have known. So I think teaching them those essential life skills about maneuvering through the industry, not just as a writer, but as a business person and as a brand, is very essential. And as far as an entertainment journalist or a journalist first, I will not lie. It is extremely easy when you're first starting off as an entertainment journalist to get very caught up. It is extremely easy because, you know, you're interviewing that celebrity, this celebrity, like we said, you're going to this carpet, you're going to that carpet, you're standing next to this person, you're interviewing that person. Oh, it's easy to get caught up, extremely. But at the end of the day, if you remove the makeup artist, if you remove the stylist, if you remove this celebrity, that celebrity, and you replace it with the owner of a mom and pop shop or an emerging artist, are you telling a story that matters? So I will always say that I am a journalist first and foremost. I don't like to say that I am an entertainment journalist, because though I have been blessed, and I don't say lucky because lucky means I just stumbled upon it. I'm blessed because I earned this, to have been in the same room and have been on Zoom and have talked to the people that I have. I will say that it's not the people that I've talked to that matter. It's the fact that I'm having meaningful conversations with the people that I talk to who matters. Because it doesn't matter if I'm talking to an Yvonne Orji or I'm talking to the dean of Spelman College. Am I telling their story right? Were they right to trust me with their story? Because a lot of people have interviewed Ciara and Russell Wilson, but the story that stands out to me is their GQ cover. Why? Because not only was there beautiful photography and all these amazing things that you look for in a cover, but their story was told right. It doesn't matter who you talk to. It matters that you were worthy of being trusted. As an entertainment writer, it's very easy to, you know, crank out those, well, let me not say easy because I don't want to minimize anything that we do. Writing 300 word, 500 word pieces are easy to crank out throughout the day, but a true journalist can tell a story that sticks. I don't care that Saweetie and Quavo broke up. I think that shoot and that story that they did, that underwater thing, that entire story that they told was told in a way that nobody else could do, because I forgot the name of the journalist, but the journalists who did it, they broke down their relationship in such a timeless way that it's going to be very hard for them to get over each other, because that story was so beautifully written. As an entertainment journalist, as a political journalist, as a culture journalist, you can talk to whoever you want to, but as a journalist, you have to put your storytelling first, and you have to prioritize your storytelling as opposed to putting the talent first. So I will always say that I'm a journalist first.
And I just wanted to, reiterate that. I think that trust part is so big. Like this story that I did on Black natives, it was right now in Hollywood, you have shows like Reservation Dogs or Resball that LeBron James is co-producing, or Sovereign with Ava DuVernay and a few Indigenous folks. There's sort of this Indigenous renaissance happening. But when your indigeneity or definition of who gets to be Native doesn't include Black natives, that's a problem, right? And so it was so difficult for me to go on the internet and find Black natives who were willing to talk to me because of the number that media has done. Media has definitely instilled a lot of mistrust within marginalized communities. But when the story went out today and getting their feedback, and even having to go on calls with them before and be like, this is my intent, this is what I want to do, and they building that relationship, getting messages today like, this was honestly the best interview I've ever done with press before. Like, you captured the nuances of our community. I feel so seen, etc. Like, there's really nothing better than that. And like, yeah, I am getting some, vitriol from non-Black natives who are like, why do people have to complain about things? But the truth of the matter is, like, to tell a story well and to feel trusted and to feel like you're, speaking truth to power in a very small way, I think is really important. So that's why I would put myself as a journalist first. But yeah, and then Sydney.
I mean, I agree with what both of you said about like putting like your journalist first, because at the end of the day, when you strip down all the entertainment glitz and glam, like you guys are saying, you have to apply the principles of journalism that you're learning to the entertainment and to the talent that you're interviewing or talking to or whatever. It's not just like, oh, I'm chopping it up with Drake or whatever. Like, you have to tell his story in a way that, you know, establishes sort of trust with not just you and him, but like the publication that you're working for too, because at the end of the day, you're representing yourself, but you're also representing the publication too. As far as what professors can do, I would say not just, you know, teaching students how to write and edit and everything, but also teach them about like how to create an invoice and submit that, or how the PR machine works, what a press release is, and sort of how to communicate with publicists and PR people. That's something I had to learn kind of on my own because that wasn't really in my curriculum. I was like blessed enough to attend Syracuse. They have an arts journalism specific program for grad school. So a lot of my work was like, and I guess this can apply to what professors can do, but not, you know, kind of like opening your mind, and when you're assigning assignments, kind of tailoring it to what your students, like, get to know your students and what they're interested in, and tailoring the assignments to their interests. But also something that was helpful for me was not always doing assignments that were tailored to music. I was assigned something that had to do with like fashion or beauty, something that's not really in my area of expertise, to get all those different, just to like get experience with like writing about different things, so you're more well-rounded and not just, you know, tunnel vision on one topic. So I answered those questions backwards, but that's my answer.
Dr. Smith, I hope that answered your question. I feel like he may be at work right now. I don't know. But anybody else have a question? Unique, did you have a question still that you wanted to ask?
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm Unique Mathis. I'm a senior at North Carolina A&T, and I'm a multimedia student. But although I'm a multimedia student, I've always had a passion for fashion, but I've always been told and advised that I don't have to go to school for it because it's all about networking. And I don't know if I may have missed it beforehand, but I just wanted to know what are some things or material that you showed like on your either your reels or your e-portfolios to show that you were interested in being like a content creator for a magazine or even an editor for a magazine, when like you're going to school, just like how you said, where they focus mainly on like PRing and producing. So how would I go about that to show my interest in something that I really want to do, if that's what it is for me?
I'll start off by speaking from the editor standpoint. When I receive pitches all the time, the first thing I'm looking for is whether or not you understand who we are. Like, if I write for Essence and you are pitching me a white male, I don't know what to do with that. You clearly don't know who we are. So next, I also want to make sure that you have a passion for what you're talking about, because there are so many pitches, and I'm pretty sure Sydney and Ruth can talk to this as well. As journalists, we get hundreds of pitches a day at the very least. It can have something to do with what we're writing about, or absolutely nothing to do with it, but we get millions of pitches all the time. It's very important to stand out. It's always important that even if you don't have, you know, the strongest bylines, or you don't think you have strong bylines, there's nothing wrong with talking yourself up. Like, hey, I know I don't have any published pieces, but I'm passionate about this. At my school, I do this. I have an interest in doing this. That way I know, like, even though you don't have anything concrete right now, I know that you care enough to put yourself out on Front Street, because that shows that you are willing to put yourself out there. And if you do have a lot of clips, I would love to see your best. Like, this is, at the end of the day, the industry is about, you know, who you know, unfortunately, but it does not diminish talent. Like, you could know absolutely nobody. When I started off in this industry, I didn't know a soul, but people had my word. And for me, word is bond. If I say I'm going to deliver something to you, I got you. If you say that you need something by the end of the day, I got you. Even if you don't have a byline, offer your services. Like, hey, I don't have anything, but if you have any volunteer positions for your next event, I'd love to help out. That way you're building that connection. Always, always, always build relationships when you're starting out. And as somebody who is technically sort of in the fashion beauty industry, because I'm kind of becoming a fashion beauty writer now, it's imperative to make sure that as a fashion slash style slash beauty writer, whether or not you're one or all three or just two of them, it's imperative to make sure that you understand that this industry is going to be a lot for Black women. It's going to be a lot. A lot of the stories that we care about, a lot of people may shy away from, especially for major white heteronormative folks run publications. It's the truth. It's a sad truth, but don't get discouraged. Just because HuffPost or Billboard or myself at Essence does not accept it, that doesn't mean that Afropunk won't. And you don't know what your career at Afropunk can do for you. It may land somewhere at Hip Hop Weekly. Who knows? Hip Hop Weekly may need style content. Maybe Control Girls or Control Om or Control Magazine may come back and they're looking for style writers. You never know. Maybe somebody who runs a itty bitty fashion blog, and I say itty bitty in quotes because no blog is small because you never know where it's going to go. They might be looking for writers, and all those clips that you build up, now you can send that to Billboard. Now you can send that to HuffPost. Now you can send that to Essence and say, hey, remember that time where I volunteered for you and I told you that I was interested in writing? Now I can come back to you and be like, boom, Pandora's box, what you got for me now? Always establish that relationship and keep in contact with them while also working on your grind, and don't take any opportunity for granted. If somebody says, for example, Fashion Week, if somebody says, hey, I don't have any hosting opportunities, I don't have any blogging opportunities, but what I can do for you is I can allow you to be backstage with me and help out the makeup artist, or I can help you dress the models. You better dress the hell out of the models, because you never know where that connection is going to lead you. That model may need somebody in the future, and maybe you dip and dabble in style, who knows? And that stylist thing that you do may turn into a writing career at Allure or at Teen Vogue or at InStyle. You never know. No path in this industry is straight and narrow. There's going to be bumps. There's going to be some winds that knock your car over to the next lane. You might have to stop and get gas and spend overnight at a Motel 6. There's no such thing as a straight and narrow path in this industry. What matters is that you get there. Make sure that you do what you can do to put yourself out there. Don't be afraid to basically put yourself out on Front Street at all times, because style, beauty, or just in general as a Black journalist is tough. It's really freaking tough, but make sure you just take it to the chin and keep pushing.
I think so much of what you said has resonated. As a student who was like interested in fashion first, now I just cover culture at large, so fashion, entertainment, etc. I think for me, like, my first ever byline was not Teen Vogue. It was Gothamist, because I connected to someone in my internship who was like, hey, do you want to be my photographer's assistant? And that's that, right? And I just said yes, and I took the opportunity and worked alongside her and put that on my resume, right? Like, photographer's assistant, Refinery 29, works under Palia Rungu as a freelance, etc. You know what I'm saying? I think, and that, like, even then before that, I had written for my campus fashion magazine, right? So I think the big thing is, like, when you're trying to make a pivot, just proof that you're creating content. I think one of my friends, I know you're multimedia, but she was in broadcast, and she's like, I don't actually like the news aspect of broadcast. She's like, I like more like creative production. And she had her own platform, her own YouTube, and used that in addition to her reels from school to show, like, here's my creative side, here's my more news side, to apply to an NBC internship. And she was like a creative intern or creative production intern at Sci-Fi, right? So if you want to do something like, here's my more news stuff for school or multimedia aspects, and then here's me having a side channel about fashion roundups of the week, right? I know for me, when I was with my campus fashion magazine, I used to be like the correspondent at local fashion events. When there's African Fashion Week in Durham, I was there, and I was there on behalf of my fashion magazine, right? Doing a write-up, etc. And just like what Deshonda has said, just like, I think keep pushing and just be open to opportunity. I will say, like, I don't want to speak for Essence, but I know Essence, I feel like it has a very strong history of like allowing HBCU students to have their first byline from Essence. I've seen that a lot with some of my peers. It'd be like, my first byline has come from here. I know, right. I know from Teen Vogue, like people have said, like, really my first byline was here, because it's a teen publication, because they care about bolstering those voices. So knowing the publication, the place that you want to be at is important. I think for me, when I pitched Glossy, which Glossy is a fashion and like tech and up and coming sort of publication. So I wrote about like this brand owned by an Afro-Latina woman, just merging immigration and activism and style. And I think with that, I had Afropunk under my belt and like Teen Vogue, Afropunk, which is Gothamist, and Teen Vogue, and maybe one other thing. I was just like, yeah, I've written about these topics, and this is why I'm well versed in it, and this is why I can write about it in this sense, right? I think it's just a matter of like showing that you're producing content. I mean, and it sounds futile, just like, oh yeah, I'm just producing content, but like having something so that when the moment comes, you're ready, I think is really big. So yeah.
I don't have anything to add.
Oh, okay. No worries. No worries.
Okay, well, thank you, ladies, so much. I really appreciate it, and thank you for taking the time out of your day to talk to us, especially if we want to, like, down the line, this is what I see myself, what I want to do for my future. Because, yeah.
Girl, that's why we're here.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much. We're going to go ahead and close out. I'll go ahead and drop the panelists' information in the chat in case you would like to connect with them via social media or reach out to them. Panelists, if you have any final tips or words of advice that you'd like to give, you're welcome to do so.
I'll just say this, as someone who was literally in your exact spot last year, I kid you not, throwing events together for CABJ. I was talking to East about it today. Just know that being at these events and talking to professionals and just like getting this knowledge, like you are like taking those steps. You're a step ahead of other folks, honestly. And so the fact that you're seeking these things is really important. It is hard. It's hard graduating and all these things, but you will figure it out. I would say just like heavy on the internships, heavy on the freelancing if you can, and just keep doing the good work. Yeah. So don't be too hard on yourselves. Keep progressing. I was exactly where you were literally a year ago. So months ago, honestly.
Yeah, I would say that same thing. And also just like have fun producing the work you want to do too. Because at the end of the day, you have to have a passion for it. So, just find joy in what you're doing and fulfillment in that. And specifically with entertainment journalism, a lot of people do come into it for the wrong reasons about wanting to be famous or, befriend artists or whatever. But at the end of the day, if you're like passionate about telling people stories in a true and authentic way, then you'll go far.
Definitely what both of these ladies said. As well, two things. Make sure that you're taking care of you and your mental health, because one thing that I absolutely did not do in college was acknowledge the fact that mental health was a very real thing. It's very, very, very easy, like I said earlier, to get caught up in the hype of everything, whether it's the excitement of going to your first red carpet and doing your first news junket, or like you're being overwhelmed by so many bylines. It's totally okay to take a break and say, I can't do this right now, or I'm stretched thin, or I have to take a break, or I got to take a pause from this. Because at the end of the day, if you're in a hospital bed, or God forbid, you're 6 feet under, you can't produce work for nobody. So make sure that you're always making sure that you are the best to yourself and that you're nice to yourself. And then my other thing is, like I said earlier, you're going to get a lot of no's, but make sure that you know why you're doing this. If you can easily throw away your career and everything that you worked for because you got one no, then honestly, this industry is not for you. You got to be able to put your nose to the grinder and say, yo, I got 16 no's, but I bet you that 17th pitch is going to be a yes. Make sure to speak positively into your career, speak life into your career, manifest that the people that you want to interview, whether it's a Yara Shahidi or an Issa Rae or a Barack and Michelle Obama, speak life into your career and you will be surprised as to where it will go.
Right. Once again, thank you guys so much for coming out. This is the conclusion of our Wicked Writing Workshop on behalf of NABJ and the A&T Register. In the words of I don't know who, but ask yourself if what you're doing today is getting you closer to where you want to be tomorrow. Thank you guys so much for coming. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving, wonderful holiday season, and good night.